Hi, my name is Paula Bush. I am an academic associate in the Department of Family Medicine. I have been with the Department of Family Medicine for about 4 or 5, longer than that, 7 years now. And in particular, I arrived here working with PRAM, Participatory Research at McGill, which was started by the Dr. Anne Macaulay, and I had the honor and the pleasure of being trained in participatory research by her during my PhD. So I'm going to speak with you about the project that I did for my PhD, which was participatory. My objective with the PhD was to promote physical activity to teenagers in particular, like broadly. And in order to do that, I wanted to work with an organization who works with teens, who already had a population of teens, and then work with that organization so that they could somehow augment their efforts with respect to promoting physical activity to teenagers. So I approached a YMCA in my neighborhood. It's a very underserved neighborhood. That was another goal that I had, was to work with underserved teenagers. And I told the YMCA about my ideas, and I didn't know what participatory research was at this point. I didn't realize that this is what I was going to be embarking on. All I knew is that I couldn't do the work myself, and I wanted to work with an organization who already had the infrastructure, was in place, and work with them to help them do their work. So right away, the YMCA and I, we agreed that, this is something that we wanted to do. We didn't really know what that was going to be or what that would look like, and it took us well over a year. It took probably closer to 2 years for us to figure out exactly what we were going to do together. And one of the reasons was that the YMCA was going through a lot of staffing changes for the first year that I was there. So when we think about challenges that may arise in participatory research, sometimes you can never control your context. So you have to work with it and see what you can do to work with that context. So even though for that first year or two I wasn't doing anything specific or concrete that actually ended up in my dissertation, I was always conducting interviews during that time and taking field notes, just so that I would be able to have some data to work with within the time frame of the PhD if I needed to. So after about 2 years, the YMCA director told me that really what she was interested in doing was evaluating the teen program. Not just only with respect to physical activity, and not just only in terms of, she wasn't only interested in promoting physical activity, she really wanted to know what the impact their program was having on the teens. So that's what we decided to do. At that point, we had found our objective, and we started to work from there. And we had, I don't know how many conversations over how many months to try to figure out what this evaluation was going to look like. And we started with a quantitative evaluation piece, and they had no tools, nothing in place. They weren't doing any kind of data collection. They weren't taking attendance up until this point. So we really started to had to start from scratch. And I proposed some initial tools, some initial data collection ideas, which weren't adapted to them, weren't necessarily useful or usable to them, which makes perfect sense because I was an outsider to the organization. I didn't know what their day-to-day was, so I couldn't figure out, I couldn't propose something that was perfectly adapted to them. However, what I did propose gave us a starting point. And then through our conversations, then we were able to modify and further develop the initial tools that I proposed to generate something that they could use and that would work for them. And we did that also with the qualitative aspect of the evaluation. It was the same process. We spent several months, a little over 8 months, to develop the quantitative data collection tools and implement that process. And then we moved on to working to implement a qualitative evaluation process, which was, and interestingly enough, it was the director of the YMCA who asked me if we couldn't do something more with the evaluation, because she said, and I quote, "The numbers only tell part of the story." And she was very conscious of the fact that there was all kinds of richness going on within the teen program that she wanted to be able to report about in a rigorous and truthful way. And she knew the numbers weren't doing that, but she didn't know anything about qualitative data and qualitative research. So again, we worked together from there to build the qualitative aspect of the evaluation. So why was it participatory? Why, like I said, I didn't know what participatory research was when I started. All I knew is that I had to work with this organization. Who was I to go into an organization and tell them this is what you should be doing to promote physical activity? On the one hand, who was I to say that to an organization who's already working just fine? But also anything that I could propose wasn't useful, wasn't usable, like the tools that I proposed to them for the evaluation, because I didn't know their context. So I knew that I had to work with them if I wanted to if I wanted for my research to have a lasting impact, which was a main goal of mine. So it became participatory by virtue of the fact that I knew I just had to work with them. And as I was going through it, and because it was my PhD project, well, bit by bit, I was learning about participatory research, and I was realizing, okay, what I'm doing is in fact participatory research. And then the more I learned the principles, the more I was able to push a few things to make sure that we really were making all of the decisions together, the research-related decisions together with respect to the evaluation. So what did it look like? If I could give you a few more concrete details about what exactly this participatory project looked like, what it is to partner with people on the ground. In my case, it looked like a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions. Not meetings, for the most part, not meetings that were scheduled. This was something, when I would talk with various people at the YMCA and say, can I come by and talk to you about something or, our work, they would say, yes, come by whenever we have an open door policy. And this was a little bit tricky for me to navigate because I always felt that I was imposing, that I would arrive, and what if they were in the middle of working on something in particular? I didn't feel like I could just show up and start to talk with them, but that's the mode that they preferred, and that's what I did. And sometimes I would show up and it wouldn't be a good time to talk, and other times it would. I live only about 5 minutes away, so that's something to keep in mind. In my case, it was completely feasible for me to run over and to have to come back home again if I couldn't speak with them. So I would go over once, twice a week, sometimes more, especially in the beginning, and talk with everybody who works there, talk with the teenagers, hang out in the teen zone, to try to get a feel for what this program was and to get an idea as to which data could be collected and how. So I became a sort of it was viewed as part of the team, part of the teen program team, even though I remained always an outsider, always somebody who didn't know all the ins and outs of what they do, which actually turned out to be a very, very positive thing. My outsider viewpoint merged with their insider viewpoint allowed us to generate a whole new perspective of the program and how to evaluate it, that neither of us would have figured out on our own, and that in the end turned out to be better than what either of us could have figured out on our own. So I guess that's the first thing, or the main thing, is hanging out at the YMCA and being there and talking with them. Another thing is compromising and taking things perhaps slowly, working incrementally, recognizing that you can't go from point A to point B necessarily as quickly as you would like to, or not always in any case, because maybe the time isn't right for them. Maybe the time isn't right for your partners to move forward on something. That happened to me a lot at the Y. Sometimes their priorities had to change and we'd have to put some of our work on hold. Also, there's a certain amount of readiness that has to be developed for certain changes that you may want to try to implement. One of the people that I worked with in the beginning, one of the coordinators, he said to me about some of the evaluation work, he said, I see what you're doing. I see that it's interesting, but I don't think I need it. And then a year later, he was like, oh, I'm so glad we did this. It just took him a while to see how the work that we were doing was going to be beneficial to him and why the work was worth it. And so that required a lot of work on my part to try to figure out how to help him see that what I thought we should be doing was a good idea. But it also required me to listen to him and to realize that, okay, wait a second, maybe what I'm proposing isn't necessary. So you have to have a good ability to look at yourself and to recognize that, okay, wait a second, you might not know best. So the benefits of using a participatory approach are innumerable. I'm completely biased. I will say that right out. I'm completely biased. I have worked on other participatory research projects also, not only my own, and I've worked on literature reviews of participatory research. So I feel I've seen multiple examples of how, yes, this approach is almost always possible to use regardless of the type of the research question, and almost always leads to somehow something just a little bit better, just a little bit more in terms of the results and the effects of the actual research. So, like I alluded to before, our evaluation ended up being just far better than what it would have been had the YMCA tried to do it on their own, or had they hired me to do it for them. And that's actually quite a discussion that I had with the director one day at the Y. I said, had you hired me as an outside evaluator and we hadn't had all of the multiple conversations that we did over the years that we were working on this, the evaluation reports that I would have produced for them in the end probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. It wouldn't have spoken to them in the way that our results do speak to them now, because we built the evaluation to work for them. And the other thing is that they don't need me anymore. It's been about 4 or 5 years since I finished this project, and I'm still around at the Y, but not nearly to the extent that I was. For a variety of reasons, I haven't been able to invest as much time with them. But they still do the evaluation. They still collect all of the quantitative and qualitative data, and they look at their results even though I'm not there. So there has been some lasting change because we built a system that they could use. If I could describe a challenge, so I mentioned the time. The other piece around the time was that I found it very slow. I could have on my own implemented our whole evaluation process within a few weeks. And it took us a year. So I found that difficult. I wanted to move things quicker. That's my nature. I want to just, run straight to the end and get it all done. And the director of the YMCA, again, we had so many conversations about this because our personalities were so opposite. She was much more methodical, slower, pushing forward a little bit, wanting to make sure everything was in place before moving ahead. So we kind of complemented each other in that way, because I wanted to run ahead quickly and she would like putting on the brakes. And in the end, I think it's great because I was probably, I think, too fast, too quick by nature, and she was perhaps a little bit too slow. So that we complemented each other, but I still found that difficult as we were going through it. I found it was really slow, and I was a little bit stressed that I wasn't going to end up with the results for my dissertation. Did our work impact change? Well, absolutely. Like I mentioned, they still do the evaluation, and I still receive emails from them when they have questions about what we could be doing, and or how they could, if they are confused over some of the data collection or some of the analyses, I will go over and work with them about that. And I still have conversations with the director for where we could go next, what we could do next. And lastly, any words of advice? I will give you the same advice that Anna Macaulay gave me, which was perfect and wonderful advice. She, being much more knowledgeable than I when I was starting, and still today for that matter, but when I was starting, she said to me, she was really concerned that I wasn't going to be able to have data for my dissertation because she knows how slow these projects can be, especially if you're trying to build a partnership from scratch, which was my case. And she very calmly asked me what my plans were if things didn't move as quickly as I was hoping. And I said, well, I'm going to be collecting data on the process. And in the end, my entire dissertation is all about the process, and which is a good thing, I think, for the participatory research literature in general, because we don't have a lot of empirical data on the process and the effects of the process of participatory research. But had I not been doing ongoing data collection, keeping all of my emails, recording all of my conversations with everybody at the YMCA, keeping field notes, pages and pages and books full of field notes, I wouldn't have had I wouldn't have had the data to work from to be able to complete my dissertation in the time frame. So that would be, I think, my biggest piece of advice. After that, the typical things you hear: being patient, constantly checking yourself and verifying, are you being perceived as respectful? You may think you're being respectful towards your partners, but are you being perceived as respectful? And being comfortable with the unknown and the ambiguity of the whole process. That was a big thing for me, to figure out how to get comfortable with the fact that I just didn't know where this project was going to take me and where it was going and when, and I was just going to go with it. So that, I would say, is the last bits of advice I could offer. Thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful.